I am Joshua, 35 years old, and I caught my parents trying to steal my $1 million property to give it to my deadbeat brother as an early inheritance. Before I tell you how I sent them to jail with a single text message, let me know where you guys are watching from in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. It was supposed to be a triumphant return. I was driving a rented Rolls-Royce Ghost, a massive black beast of a car that floated over the snow-covered roads of Colorado like a silent predator. I'd spent the last 6 months in Dubai, managing the construction of a 70-story luxury hotel. The sand, the heat, the constant shouting matches with contractors in 3 different languages. It had drained me. All I wanted was snow, pine trees, and my family. That's the lie we tell ourselves, isn't it? That no matter how successful we get, no matter how far we run, home is where the heart is. I was about to learn that sometimes home is just where the hurt is. I pulled into the driveway of my parents' house. It was a decent place, a 2-story colonial I had paid off for them 5 years ago. That was my thank you for raising me. You'd think paying off a mortgage would buy you some respect or at least some boundaries. But in my family, money didn't buy respect. It just painted a target on your back. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. The dark circles under my eyes were visible even in the dim winter light. I took a deep breath, put on my project manager face, the mask of calm authority I wore when dealing with billionaire clients, and stepped out into the cold. I popped the trunk. It was filled with gifts, not just generic gift cards, but thoughtful, expensive things. A vintage watch for my dad, Thomas. A designer handbag for my mom, Sarah. And for my brother, Caleb, and his wife, Jessica, I had brought high-end electronics for their kids, Noah and Liam. I wanted to be the cool uncle. I wanted to be the good son. I walked up the steps, my boots crunching on the fresh snow. The door swung open before I could knock. Joshua, you're finally here. Mom pulled me into a hug. It felt warm but brief. Before I could even get my coat off, she was looking over my shoulder. Did you bring the gifts? The boys are so excited. Good to see you too, Mom, I said, suppressing a sigh. Yeah, they're in the car. My dad, Thomas, walked into the hallway. He didn't hug me. He just clapped a hand on my shoulder. A heavy, possessive grip. Good trip, son? You look like you've been printing money over there. It was work, Dad. Hard work. Well, come in, come in. Caleb's already here. He's got some big news to share. Of course he did. Caleb always had big news. Usually, it involved a new business opportunity that required a 5-figure loan he would never pay back. Caleb was the golden child. He was 5 years younger, charming, irresponsible, and completely allergic to hard work. While I was studying engineering on a scholarship and working nights, Caleb was partying his way through 3 different colleges, all paid for by the college fund that was supposed to be split between us. I walked into the living room. The heat was cranked up too high. Caleb was lounging on the sofa, a beer in hand. He didn't get up. Hey, big brother. Nice suit. Is that Italian? You look like a walking bank vault. Caleb laughed. Hey, Caleb, I said, forcing a smile. Good to see you. The next few hours were a blur of forced cheer. I handed out the gifts. The kids screamed with delight over the iPads. Mom cooed over the handbag, checking the label immediately to make sure it was real. Dad put on the watch, nodded approvingly, and said, "Not bad. Must be nice to have that kind of disposable income." Nobody asked about my life. Nobody asked about the project in Dubai, the 18-hour days, the loneliness, or the fact that I hadn't had a home-cooked meal in half a year. They only cared about what I brought to the table. I was their personal ATM, their retirement plan, their safety net. By 8 p.m., I needed a break. The noise, the heat, and Caleb's bragging about his latest investment scheme in cryptocurrency were giving me a migraine. "I'm going to get some more wine from the kitchen," I announced. "Grab the expensive bottle you brought," Caleb shouted after me. "The cheap stuff Dad buys gives me a headache." I walked into the kitchen. It was empty. I leaned against the counter, closing my eyes for a second, just enjoying the silence. The kitchen connected to the dining room via a small service window that was currently closed, but the door was slightly ajar. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low, conspiratorial, drifting in from the dining room where my parents had snuck off to check on the roast. Thomas, are you sure about this? It was my mother's voice. She sounded nervous, but not disapproving. Just anxious about the logistics. I'm telling you, Sarah, it's the only way. My dad's voice rumbled. We tear down the walls of that space Joshua uses as his study on the second floor. It's huge. We knock that out, combine it with the guest room, and it makes a perfect master suite and playroom for Caleb's kids. I froze. The wine bottle in my hand felt suddenly heavy, like a weapon. My study, my vacation lodge, my sanctuary. I had bought a massive, custom-built timber lodge up in the mountains about 2 years ago. It was my pride and joy. I had designed every inch of it. The study was my masterpiece. Mahogany bookshelves, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Rockies. Rare books I'd collected from all over the world. It was the one place on earth where I felt at peace. But what about Joshua? Mom asked. He's going to notice if his office is gone. He's never there, Dad scoffed. He's always in Dubai or New York or Tokyo. The house just sits there, gathering dust. The selfish Sarah. Pure greed. Caleb is struggling. He has a family. He needs a house that fits his status. Joshua has plenty of money. He can buy another one if he cares that much. I know, Mom sighed. It's just doing it without asking him? If we ask, he'll say no. You know how stingy he gets about his boundaries. Dad spat the word boundaries like it was a curse. We'll get the renovation done while he's back in New York next month. Once Caleb and the kids are moved in, what's he going to do? Kick out his own nephews? Throw his brother onto the street? No, Joshua is soft. He'll complain, but he'll accept it. We just need to present it as a done deal. We'll tell him it's a surprise. Mom added, her voice brightening, that we fixed up the place for the family. He can't get mad at family love. Right? Exactly. I've already got Anthony's crew up there. They started stripping the floors 3 days ago. My blood ran cold. Started? They weren't just planning it. They had already started. I felt a physical blow to my chest. The betrayal wasn't just about the house. It was the absolute lack of respect. They saw me as a resource to be harvested, not a person. They were stripping my floors, my sanctuary, to build a nest for Caleb, the son who had never worked a hard day in his life. I gripped the wine bottle so hard I thought the glass would shatter. My first instinct was to kick open the door, scream at them, flip the table and burn this bridge right now. But then the engineer in me took over. Lashing out in anger is what amateurs do. That was something my mentor told me years ago when a supplier tried to screw us on steel prices. When you're emotional, you make mistakes. When you're cold, you win. I took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. I put the wine bottle down. I smoothed my jacket. I checked my face in the reflection of the microwave. I looked calm, terrifyingly calm. I picked the bottle back up and walked back into the dining room. Sorry took so long, I said, my voice steady, putting on a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Couldn't find the corkscrew. Dad jumped a little, sliding a piece of paper, which I now realized was a blueprint, under his placemat. Mom's smile was too wide, too brittle. Oh, that's fine, honey. We were just talking about how nice it is to have everyone together. Ideally, I said, pouring the wine into Dad's glass. It's all about family, isn't it? Helping each other out. Exactly, Dad said, relaxing. He thought he was safe. That's exactly what we were saying. I looked at him. I looked at the man who taught me to ride a bike, the man I had looked up to for half my life. And I realized I didn't know him at all. Or maybe I was finally seeing him for the first time. Here's to family, I said, raising my glass. To family, they chorused. I drank. The expensive wine tasted like vinegar, but I smiled, because I knew something they didn't. They thought they were playing checkers. They didn't realize I was already playing chess, and I was about to checkmate them so hard they wouldn't even see the board flip. We moved to the table for dinner. The roast turkey sat in the center, golden and steaming, a masterpiece I had paid for but Mom was taking credit for. I basted it for 4 hours. Mom lied effortlessly as she served Caleb a massive drumstick. I sat there, dissecting my food, my mind racing. The conversation at the table was the usual torture. Caleb was dominating the airspace. "So, Josh," Caleb said, his mouth half full, "I've been looking into this crypto mining rig setup. This passive income, bro. I just need about 20 grand to get the hardware. With your salary, that's like, what? A week's pay." "My salary isn't liquid cash, Caleb," I said quietly. "It's tied up in investments and retirement funds." "Oh, come on." Caleb rolled his eyes. "You're always so corporate. Investments. Live a little. Help your brother out. I'm trying to build a future for Noah and Liam here." There it was. The guilt trip. Using the kids as human shields. "I thought your dropshipping business was supposed to be the future?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Caleb's face darkened. "The market shifted. It wasn't my fault. You wouldn't understand, you have a steady paycheck. You've never had to hustle." I almost laughed. "I never had to hustle?" Flashback. I was 18. I had just gotten accepted into the state engineering program. I came home waving the acceptance letter, so proud. Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, looking grim. "We can't pay for it, Joshua," he had said. "But the college fund," I had argued. "Grandpa left money for both of us. We had to use your half," Mom had said, not even looking at me. "Caleb's private school tuition went up. He needs that environment, Joshua. He's sensitive. You're strong. You can work. You can get loans." So I did. I worked night shifts at a warehouse while taking full-time engineering classes. I graduated with honors and zero help. Meanwhile, Caleb flunked out of 3 different schools, burning through his half of the fund and then some. They had sacrificed my future to buy him a present over and over again. End flashback. "No," I said to Caleb. "I'm not investing in the mining rig." The table went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. "Joshua," Dad said, his voice dropping to that deep, authoritative baritone he used to scare me with when I was a kid. "Your brother is asking for help. Family helps family." "I've helped," I said, cutting a piece of turkey with surgical precision. "I paid off your mortgage, Dad. I paid for Caleb's car. I paid for the kids' private school tuition last year. I think I've done my part." "You're keeping score?" Mom asked, eyes wide, playing the victim instantly. "You're counting pennies with your own blood?" "I'm just saying the bank is closed for today," I said, taking a sip of wine. Dad cleared his throat, changing tactics. I could see the gears turning in his head. He needed to get me away from the topic of money, and more importantly, he needed to know my schedule so they could proceed with their illegal renovation. "So," Dad asked, wiping his mouth, "what's the plan for the next few days? You heading back to New York immediately?" "Actually," I said, watching him closely, "I was thinking of heading up to the lodge tomorrow. I haven't driven the Porsche in months. I miss the mountains. I might spend the rest of the holidays up there, work remotely." The reaction was immediate. Panic. Mom dropped her fork, clattered loudly against the china. Caleb froze. Dad choked on his wine. "No," Dad blurted out. I raised an eyebrow. "No, I mean," Dad stammered, his face turning red. "You shouldn't go up there right now. It's dangerous. Dangerous." "The storm," Dad said, gaining confidence in his lie. "We heard from the neighbors. Old Man Higgins called yesterday. He said a massive oak tree fell across the main access road. Power lines are down everywhere. No electricity, no heat. The road is completely blocked by snow and debris. The county says it won't be cleared until spring." "That sounds serious," I said, feigning concern. "It is," Mom chimed in, nodding vigorously. "It's a disaster zone, honey. If you go up there, you'll be stuck. You could freeze to death. And with your busy schedule, you can't afford to be trapped off the grid. Plus," Dad added, leaning in, "you deserve to relax. Stay in the city. Stay at a nice hotel with room service. Or stay here. Why go up to a cold, dark cabin? I looked at them. They were lying to my face with such ease, such practiced coordination. They weren't protecting me from a storm. They were protecting their construction crew. They were protecting their theft. If I went up there now, I'd catch them red-handed. They needed time to finish the job. Wow, I said. I had no idea it was that bad. I didn't see any alerts on the weather app. Oh, the apps are never accurate for the mountains, Caleb said quickly. Local knowledge. Bro, trust us. Well, I sighed, putting on a disappointed face. I guess you're right. I can't risk getting stuck. I have meetings next week. I'll stay at the Ritz-Carlton downtown for a few days, then fly back to New York. The relief in the room was palpable. Shoulders dropped. Smiles returned. That's the smart choice, son, Dad said, pouring himself more wine, his hand shaking slightly. Smart choice. Focus on your work. Leave the lodge until spring. It'll still be there. It'll still be there, he said. But it wouldn't be my lodge anymore. It would be Caleb's playroom. Yeah, I said softly. It'll still be there. I finished my meal, feeling like I was swallowing stones. Every bite was a reminder of their duplicity. They thought they had won. They thought they had manipulated the rich, busy, oblivious son into staying away. But they forgot one thing. I wasn't just a rich son. I was a project manager. My entire career was built on verifying data. Trust but verify. And I knew for a fact that the weather in the mountains was clear. I had checked the live satellite feed from my phone before I even walked into the house. The sky over my lodge was crystal clear. The only storm brewing was the one sitting at this dining table. I'm tired, I said, standing up. Jet lag is kicking in. I'm going to head to the hotel now. You're not staying here? Mom asked, feigning hurt. No, I need to be up early for a conference call with Tokyo. I lied. I don't want to wake you guys up. I grabbed my coat. I didn't hug them goodbye. I couldn't bear to touch them. Drive safe, Dad called out cheerfully. And stay away from the mountains. I will, I promised. I walked out to the Rolls-Royce, the cold air biting at my face. It felt cleansing. I got into the car, the heavy door sealing me inside with a reassuring thud. I sat there for a moment in the silence, gripping the leather steering wheel. The sadness was gone now. The disappointment was gone. All that was left was a cold, hard resolve. I started the engine. The V12 purred to life. I wasn't going to the mountains tonight. Not yet. I needed to gather my ammunition. I pulled out of the driveway, watching my childhood home shrink in the rearview mirror. I saw the lights of the dining room still on, saw the shadows of my family moving around, probably celebrating their victory, probably laughing about how easy it was to fool me. Laugh while you can, I whispered to the empty car. I drove toward the city, but my mind was already miles away, plotting the demolition of their little scheme. I checked into the Ritz-Carlton downtown. The receptionist smiled at my credit card, the black titanium one that carries a certain weight, but I barely registered her presence. I got to my suite, threw my bag on the bed, and immediately set up my command center. Laptop open, encrypted connection established. I didn't just have a security system at my lodge. I had a military-grade surveillance setup. When you spend months away from your property, and when that property houses $1 million worth of art, cars, and rare books, you don't rely on a simple doorbell camera. I had motion sensors, interior 4K cameras, and satellite uplink. I logged in. My hands were trembling slightly, not from cold, but from adrenaline. Connecting to remote server. Connected. The screen flickered to life. I clicked on Living Room Live Feed. My breath hitched. The beautiful, hand-scraped oak floors I had imported from Italy were gone. In their place was bare plywood. Stacks of cheap, laminate flooring boxes were piled up against the stone fireplace. They were turning my rustic, high-end mountain aesthetic into a suburban nightmare. I switched to the garage camera. I swore loudly. You have got to be kidding me. My Porsche 911 GT3 RS. My baby. A car that was worth more than Caleb's entire life earnings. It had been pushed out of the climate-controlled garage and was sitting in the driveway. It was covered in a cheap blue tarp that was flapping in the wind. Snow had drifted underneath. Inside the garage, where the Porsche was supposed to be, there was a pile of plastic junk. A disassembled jungle gym. A bouncy castle box. Bikes. They had evicted a supercar to make room for toys. Then I clicked on the study. This hurt the most. The mahogany shelves were empty. My books, first editions, engineering manuals from the 1900s, books signed by authors I admired, were dumped haphazardly into cardboard boxes labeled trash/donate. The walls, my God, the walls. They had started painting over the rich, dark wood paneling with a garish, bright yellow paint. Standing in the middle of the room on the live feed were two men I didn't recognize. They were drinking beer, setting their cans down directly on my antique drafting table without coasters. I hit the record button. I needed everything saved. Then I did something else. I accessed the digital file records for the county clerk's office. Being a property developer meant I had subscriptions to all the real estate databases. I searched for my property address. There was a pending application. Transfer of deed. Quitclaim. I opened the PDF. It was a document dated 3 days ago, supposedly signed by me, transferring 50% ownership of the property to Caleb and 50% to Thomas, for the sum of $1. I zoomed in on the signature. It was a decent forgery, but it was definitely a forgery. They hadn't just vandalized my house. They were trying to steal it. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was felony fraud. Grand larceny. I picked up my phone. It was 11:30 p.m. I didn't care. I dialed David, my corporate lawyer. David picked up on the second ring. Joshua? It's late. You okay? David? I said, my voice ice cold. I need you to wake up. We have a red dragon situation. Red dragon was our code for a catastrophic threat to assets. We usually used it for hostile corporate takeovers or massive site accidents. Talk to me, David said, his tone instantly shifting to professional sharpness. My parents and brother have broken into my lodge. They are currently destroying the interior. They have forged a quitclaim deed transferring the title to themselves. I have it all on video, and I have the digital trail of the deed application. Silence on the other end. Then the sound of David getting out of bed and putting on glasses. Okay, David said. That's aggressive. Joshua, look, I have to ask you this as your lawyer and your friend. Once we pull this trigger, there is no going back. These are your parents. If we file this, they are looking at serious prison time. Fraud, forgery, destruction of property over $5,000, that's a felony. I know, I said. Are you sure you don't want to just go up there, scare them and make them stop? We can settle this quietly. I looked at the screen. I saw one of the workers in my study knock over a lamp, a Tiffany lamp worth $12,000, and laugh when it shattered. He didn't even bend down to pick it up. No, I said. They aren't treating me like family, David. They're treating me like a host to be drained. If I let this slide, they will never stop. They'll take the house, then my accounts, then everything. I want them stopped. I want them prosecuted. Understood, David said. I'll draft the emergency injunction now. I'll wake up Judge Miller. We can get the order signed electronically by 6 a.m. I'll contact the sheriff in Summit County. Do you know him? Sheriff Hunter? I asked. Yeah, we went to high school together. He knows the property. Good. I'll coordinate with him. We'll treat this as an active burglary and trespassing in progress. Don't tell them I'm coming, I said. I want to be there when the hammer drops. Consider it done. I'll meet you at the sheriff's station at 8 a.m. I hung up. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the chair by the window, watching the city lights of Denver, watching the feed on my laptop. I watched as my family destroyed the life I had built. At 7 a.m., I checked out. I didn't take the Rolls-Royce. It was too conspicuous. I went to a rental agency down the street and rented a black Chevy Tahoe. Something that looked like law enforcement. something that blended in. I drove out of the city, heading west into the mountains. The storm my father had lied about was nowhere to be seen. The sky was a piercing blue. The roads were clear. As I drove, my phone buzzed. A text from Mom. "Morning, honey. Hope you slept well. Have a safe flight back to New York. We love you. We're just gonna have a quiet day at home watching movies." I stared at the text. Watching movies. I checked the GPS tracker I had secretly installed on Dad's truck a year ago, after he borrowed it without asking and disappeared for 2 days. The dot on the map was moving fast, heading west on I-70. They weren't watching movies. They were heading to the lodge to supervise the destruction. "Love you too," I whispered, deleting the message. I merged onto the highway. The hunt was on. I parked the black Tahoe in the lot of a Greasy Spoon diner called Sally's Place, about 5 miles down the mountain from my lodge. It was the only way in or out of the valley. If they were coming, they had to pass this spot. I ordered a black coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber and regret, but the caffeine sharpened my senses. I sat in a booth near the window, my hat pulled down low. David texted me. "Writ of possession and emergency restraining order signed. Sheriff Hunter has the paperwork. He is assembling a team. He's not happy about the forgery, Joshua. He takes property rights seriously up here." I texted back, "Hold position until the targets are on site. I want them all inside." Copy that. 10 minutes later, I saw them. Dad's pickup truck, followed by Caleb's SUV. They were driving fast, kicking up slush. I saw Caleb's arm hanging out the window, cigarette in hand. They looked like they owned the world. They looked like conquerors on their way to survey their new kingdom. I waited for them to pass. Then I waited another 2 minutes. I paid for my coffee, tipped the waitress $20, and walked out to the Tahoe. I followed them up the winding mountain road. My heart was pounding, a steady drumbeat against my ribs. This was the road I drove when I wanted to escape the world. Now it felt like a corridor to a war zone. As I got closer to the property, I killed the headlights, even though it was day. I wanted to be a ghost. I pulled off onto a small service road about 100 yards from the main gate. I grabbed my binoculars and crept through the tree line. The snow was deep, up to my knees, but I didn't feel the cold. I reached a vantage point overlooking the lodge. It was chaos. There were 3 contractor vans parked in the driveway. The front door was wide open. I could hear the sound of power saws and sledgehammers echoing off the mountains. It was a sickening sound, the sound of my home screaming. Dad was standing on the porch, holding a clipboard, directing the workers. He looked energized, younger than he had yesterday. Theft suited him. Mom was dragging bags of trash, my stuff, out of the house and piling them near the fire pit. They were planning to burn my things. Not donate them, burn them. And Caleb? Caleb was standing next to my Porsche. He kicked the tire. He said something to his wife, Jessica, who laughed. Then, right in front of my eyes, Caleb took out a key to my house, and scratched it along the side of the Porsche. I gasped. He just keyed a $250,000 car because he felt like it. That was the moment the last shred of hesitation evaporated. I wasn't watching my family anymore. I was watching criminals. I was watching enemies. I pulled out my phone. I dialed Sheriff Hunter directly. "Hunter," I said. "They're all there. Anthony's construction crew. My parents. My brother. They are destroying the Porsche now. We're 2 minutes out, Josh." Hunter's voice was grim. "Stay out of sight. We don't want a hostage situation if they panic." "Don't worry," I said. "I'm just the audience right now." I hung up and watched. The next 2 minutes felt like 2 years. I watched my mother throw a heavy blanket, a cashmere throw I bought in Scotland, onto the wet snow. I watched Dad high-five a worker who was carrying out my custom leather armchair. Then the sound changed. The distant wail of sirens cut through the crisp mountain air. Dad froze. He looked toward the main road. The workers stopped their saws. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with sudden, confused dread. Then the cavalry arrived. 4 sheriff's cruisers drifted around the corner, lights flashing red and blue against the white snow. They didn't slow down. They roared up the driveway, blocking the exit. Sheriff's Department. Hunter's voice boomed over the PA system. Drop your tools. Hands in the air. Now. It was pandemonium. The workers dropped everything and scrambled. One guy tried to run toward the woods, but a deputy cut him off with a taser drawn. Don't even think about it. Dad stood on the porch, his mouth open, clipboard falling from his hands. Mom screamed, putting her hands to her face. Caleb looked like he was about to vomit. He actually tried to hide behind his wife. Who is the owner of this property? Hunter shouted, stepping out of his vehicle, hand resting on his holster. I am. Dad shouted back, trying to regain his composure. I'm the owner. This is my house. You have no right. We have a report of active burglary and felony destruction of property. Hunter yelled. Get down on the ground. All of you. It's a misunderstanding. Dad yelled, walking down the steps, hands waving. My son gave me permission. Call him. Call Joshua. I stepped out from the tree line. I walked slowly down the driveway, the snow crunching under my boots. I was wearing a black wool coat, dark sunglasses, and an expression that could have frozen lava. Everyone turned to look at me. Joshua! Mom cried out, relief washing over her face. Oh, thank God. Tell them this is a mistake. Dad pointed at me, his face red with indignation. See? There he is. My son. Tell this idiot sheriff that we're renovating. Tell him to unhand us. I didn't stop walking until I was standing right in front of Hunter. I looked at the sheriff, then I looked at my parents. The silence was absolute. The only sound was the wind in the pines and the crackle of the police radios. I slowly took off my sunglasses. Officer, I said, my voice loud and clear. These people are trespassing. I have never authorized any renovation. And I certainly didn't authorize them to destroy my home. Dad's face went pale. Joshua, what are you saying? I'm saying, I turned to face him, that you're under arrest. The color drained from my father's face so fast I thought he might faint. Joshua, stop this joke. It's not funny. Send these policemen away. It's no joke, Thomas, I said, using his first name. Felt like a slap, and he flinched. You are destroying assets belonging to the JM Trust. You forged a deed. You broke in. Broke in. Dad sputtered, spit flying from his lips. I used the key you left in the safe at the house. The spare key. You gave it to us. He turned to Sheriff Hunter, desperate. He left a key in the family safe. That's implied permission. That proves trust. I laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. Ah, the key, I said. Let's talk about the key. I stepped closer to him. The deputies moved in, ready to restrain him if he lunged. But I waved them off. I wanted him to hear this. 6 months ago, I said, pitching my voice so Caleb and Mom could hear it too. I noticed some money missing from my checking account. Small amounts. Transfer fees. I realized someone had been snooping in my files when I visited. So, before I left for Dubai, I changed the locks on this lodge. They are smart locks now. Biometric. Dad looked confused. But the key, it opened the door. No, I shook my head. The key in the safe, that was for the old lock. It doesn't open the front door anymore. It opens the shed around the back. But I saw the security footage, Dad. I saw you try the key on the front door. It didn't work. So what did you do? I pointed to the front door frame, which was splintered. You drilled the lock. You broke in. You used the key as a prop to convince these workers. I gestured to the terrified construction crew that you had access. But you didn't. I leaned in close. I left that old key in the safe as a test. A litmus test. I wanted to see if you could respect a single boundary. If you had just left the key there, we'd be fine. But you took it. You took the bait. And now you're caught in the trap. You set us up? Mom wailed. Your own parents? I protected myself from thieves. I corrected her. You just happened to be the thieves. Sheriff Hunter stepped forward. That's enough. Thomas, Sarah, Caleb, turn around. Hands behind your backs. No! Caleb shouted. He tried to run. He actually tried to bolt toward the woods. He made it about 3 steps before a deputy tackled him into the snow. Caleb screamed like a child as the handcuffs clicked shut. My Porsche! Caleb yelled, face pressed into the slush. I need that house. I promised the guys I'd have the house. Promised who? I asked, looking down at him. Caleb didn't answer, just sobbed. I watched as the deputies cuffed my mother. She was crying hysterically, looking at me with eyes full of betrayal, as if I was the one doing this to her. Joshua, please, she begged. We're family. We did this for you. We wanted you to be close to us. You did this to replace me, I said. You threw out my books. You destroyed my car. You tried to erase me from my own house so you could install your golden child. I looked at the construction crew. Anthony, the foreman, was shaking. And you, I said to Anthony, you didn't check the deed? You didn't ask for a contract signed by the owner. Your dad said. Anthony stammered. My dad isn't the owner. You are facing charges for aiding and abetting and criminal negligence. I hope you have good insurance, Anthony, because I'm going to sue your company into the ground to pay for this restoration. Anthony looked like he was going to cry. They loaded them into the cars. It was a surreal parade. My father, who always walked with his chest out, was slumped over, defeated. My mother, who cared more about appearances than anything, was being shoved into a police car in front of the neighbors who had gathered to watch. As the sheriff's car started to pull away, Dad looked at me through the window. His eyes weren't sad. They were hateful, pure, unadulterated hate. He realized he had lost control of me forever. I stood there in the driveway, watching the convoy disappear down the mountain. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy with the wreckage of my family tree. I turned back to the house. The door was hanging off its hinges. My Porsche was scratched and dented. The snow was trampled, but it was mine. I took a deep breath of the cold air. It hurt my lungs, but it felt clean. That moment, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance, was the hardest moment of my life. But it was also the first moment I was truly free. I had cut the anchor that had been dragging me down for 35 years. This is the moment that changed everything, when I finally took back control of my life. Thank you for being patient and following me this far. You guys are amazing. Please help me by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've stuck with me to this point. This not only helps more people find this story, but it tells me that my experience means something to you. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. I spent the next hour with the deputies who stayed behind to secure the scene. We did a walkthrough to assess the damages. It was brutal. The estimated cost to repair the floors, the walls, the custom cabinetry, and the vehicle damage was hovering around $150,000. But the real shock came later at the sheriff's station. I drove down there to meet David. The station was buzzing. In a small town like this, arresting an entire family for grand larceny was the event of the decade. David met me in the waiting room. He looked grim. We found something, David said, leading me into a side office. Sheriff Hunter ran a background check on Caleb deeper than the usual stuff. What is it? I asked. Drugs. Gambling, David said. Bad gambling. Caleb is in the hole for about $200,000 to some very unsavory people in Denver. Loan sharks. The pieces of the puzzle slammed into place. The house, I whispered. That's why he needed the house. Exactly, David nodded. He wasn't just going to live there. We found texts on his phone. He was planning to use the forged deed to take out a hard money loan against the property. He was going to leverage your equity to pay off his mob debts. And when he inevitably defaulted on that loan, I would have lost the house. I finished the sentence. The bank or the loan sharks would have foreclosed on it. And your parents knew, David added softly. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They knew. We interviewed your father. He admitted they knew Caleb was in trouble. They thought if they gave him the house, he could fix his debts and start over. They were sacrificing your asset to save Caleb's legs from getting broken. I sat down heavily in the chair. They were willing to bankrupt me, steal my sanctuary, and destroy my credit, all to clean up Caleb's mess. Again. Can I see them? I asked. You shouldn't, David advised. It won't be productive. I need to, I said. One last time. David nodded and led me to the holding area. They were in separate cells, but they could see me. Dad stood up when I walked in. He looked older, smaller. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, frantic energy. Joshua, he pleaded, clutching the bars. You have to drop the charges. This is crazy. Caleb is in trouble. Real trouble. If he stays in here, the people he owes, they can't reach him, but the interest is piling up. You have to bail us out. We can fix this. Fix it. I looked at him. You tried to steal my home, Dad. You committed fraud. We were protecting your brother. Mom sobbed from the next cell. What kind of monster chooses a house over his own brother's life? The kind of monster who is tired of being the sacrifice, I said calmly. You had a choice. You could have asked me for help. You could have told me the truth about Caleb's debt. We could have worked something out. But you didn't. You chose to steal. You chose to lie. You chose to treat me like an enemy. We're family, Dad shouted. No, I said. Family doesn't do this. I'm done, Dad. I've instructed David to file for a permanent restraining order. I'm not posting bail. I'm not hiring you a lawyer. You're on your own. You can't do this. Caleb screamed from down the hall. I'll die in here. Josh, you should have thought about that before you keyed my Porsche, Caleb, I said. I turned to David. Let's go. I have nothing left to say. I walked out of the holding area, ignoring their screams. Joshua, come back. Joshua. Walking out of that station into the bright winter sun, I felt a strange sensation. My chest hurt, my eyes burned, but my shoulders, they felt lighter than they had in 20 years. The weight of their expectations, their manipulation, their conditional love, it was all gone. Left behind in a concrete cell. I got into the Tahoe. I had a lot of work to do. I had a house to fix. I had a life to rebuild. But for the first time, the foundation was solid. It was mine. 6 months. That's how long it took for the dust to settle. I stood on the deck of my lodge, holding a mug of black coffee, watching the sunrise paint the peaks of the Rockies in shades of gold and violet. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth, not sawdust and betrayal. The silence was absolute. No saws, no shouting, no sirens. Just the wind whispering through the trees and the distant call of a hawk. It was over. Behind me, the house was whole again. It had cost me nearly 150 grand, but every inch of the damage my family had inflicted had been erased. The cheap laminate flooring they had installed was ripped out, replaced by hand-scraped hickory that was even better than the original oak. The walls of the study, which they had desecrated with that hideous yellow paint, were stripped, sanded, and stained a deep, rich mahogany. I had spent weeks tracking down replacements for the books they had thrown away. Some were irreplaceable, lost to the landfill or a bonfire I hadn't seen. But I had filled the shelves with new stories, new knowledge. Felt different now. It wasn't just a collection. It was a testament to resilience. I walked down to the garage. The heavy door slid open with a smooth, silent hum. There she was. The Porsche 911 GT3 RS. It had taken 4 months in a specialist body shop in Denver. They had to repaint the entire driver's side where Caleb had keyed it. They had to replace the suspension that had been damaged when they pushed it out into the freezing mud. But now, under the garage lights, the car gleamed like a dark jewel. It looked untouched, pristine. But I knew. I ran my hand along the fender. I knew the scars were underneath the paint. Just like I knew the scars on my own heart were still there, hidden under my tailored suit and calm demeanor. The legal battle had been a war of attrition. I remembered the day of the sentencing hearing vividly. It was a Tuesday in late March. The snow was melting into gray slush on the streets of the county seat. I sat in the front row wearing a charcoal suit, David by my side. My parents and Caleb sat at the defendant's table. They looked like ghosts of the people I once knew. Dad had lost 20 pounds. His suit hung off him like it belonged to a bigger man. Mom looked frail, her hair untied, her eyes darting around the courtroom as if looking for an exit that didn't exist. Caleb looked the worst. He was twitchy, pale, sweating even in the air-conditioned room. He kept looking at the back of the room, terrified that someone else might walk in. The loan sharks, their lawyer, a court-appointed public defender because they couldn't afford a private one after I froze their access to my accounts, tried to paint a picture of a misunderstanding. Your Honor, the lawyer had argued, his voice tired. This is a domestic dispute that spiraled out of control. These are parents who simply wanted to help their struggling son. They believed they had implied permission. They are elderly. Incarceration would be a death sentence. I watched the judge. Judge Miller was a stern woman with steel-gray hair and zero tolerance for nonsense. She looked over her glasses at my father. Mr. Davison, she said, you forged a deed. You attempted to transfer $1 million asset out of a trust and into your name. That isn't a misunderstanding. That is calculated fraud. You destroyed the interior of a home that did not belong to you. That is malice. We did it for family, Dad had blurted out, standing up. My son. He has so much. He didn't need it. We just wanted to level the playing field. Sit down, the judge snapped. The law does not recognize leveling the playing field as a defense for grand larceny. The law protects property rights, regardless of blood relation. The gavel came down like a thunderclap. Guilty, on all counts, trespassing, felony destruction of property, attempted fraud. Because they were first-time offenders and because of their age, they avoided hard prison time. They received 3 years of suspended sentences. But the financial judgment, that was where the hammer truly fell. Restitution. The court ordered them to pay me back every single penny of the damages. The construction costs, the car repairs, the legal fees. The total came to just over $185,000. I knew they didn't have it. Caleb had drained them dry years ago. So the inevitable happened. The sheriff's department seized their assets. 2 weeks after the trial, I received a notification from the bank. The house I had grown up in, the house I had paid off for them as a gift 5 years ago, was put up for auction to satisfy the judgment. I could have stopped it. I could have written a check, paid the fine myself, and let them keep the house. A younger, more foolish version of Joshua would have done exactly that. I would have played the savior. But I didn't. I sat in my office in New York, stared at the email, and pressed delete. They lost the house. They were forced to move into a 2-bedroom rental apartment on the outskirts of town, in a neighborhood that Dad used to make fun of. It was a cramped, noisy complex with thin walls and stained carpets. And Caleb? His fate was even darker. When the scheme fell apart, the investors he owed money to came calling. Without the house to leverage for a loan, Caleb had nothing. Jessica, his wife, finally woke up. She realized the entrepreneur she married was just a criminal with a gambling addiction. She filed for divorce 3 days after the sentencing. I heard the details from David. It was brutal. She took the kids, Noah and Liam, and moved back in with her parents in Ohio. She filed for full custody, citing Caleb's criminal record and the dangerous debt collectors who were looking for him. Caleb didn't even fight it. He couldn't. He was too busy hiding. Last I heard, Caleb was living in the basement of that cramped apartment with Mom and Dad, sleeping on a futon. He was working under the table as a dishwasher at a truck stop, trying to stay off the grid so the sharks wouldn't find him. The golden child, reduced to scrubbing grease off plates for minimum wage. It was a tragedy. But it was a tragedy they had written, directed, and starred in. I just refused to buy a ticket. Hey, boss! A voice snapped me out of my reverie. I turned around. It was Uncle Robert. I had invited him up to the lodge for the weekend. Robert was Dad's younger brother, the black sheep of the family because he chose to be a mechanic instead of chasing white-collar dreams. He was the only one who hadn't been at the Christmas party. "Coffee's good," Robert said, leaning against the railing. He looked older than Dad now, his face weathered by oil and sun, but his eyes were kind. "Thanks for coming up, Robert," I said. "Wouldn't miss it. Place looks healed." "It's getting there." Robert took a sip of coffee, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a slightly battered smartphone. "I never gave this back to you," he said. "After the trial." I looked at the phone. It was the evidence that had nailed the coffin shut. The twist that even David hadn't seen coming. Back when I was preparing the case, I was missing one thing: proof of premeditation. I knew they planned it, but I needed to prove they had conspired long before I arrived. Then, out of the blue, Robert had called me. Flashback to 3 months ago. I met Robert at a diner halfway between Denver and the mountains. He looked nervous. "I shouldn't be doing this," Robert had said, sliding his phone across the table. "Thomas is my brother. But what they did to you, it ain't right, Josh. It just ain't right." "What is this?" I asked. "It's the family group chat," Robert whispered. "The one they made without you. They added me by mistake thinking I'd be on board. I never said anything. I watched. Read the messages from December 1st. I opened the chat. My stomach churned. Mom, if we do it while he's in Dubai, we can claim squatters' rights if he tries to kick us out. Caleb, make sure you get the deed signed before we start demo. I know a guy who can forge the notary seal. Dad, don't worry. Joshua is soft. He'll never press charges. He needs our approval too much. That was the smoking gun. That was the proof that it wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. It was a calculated, predatory extraction of wealth. "Thank you, Robert," I had said, my voice trembling. "Why are you helping me?" "Because when my wife died," Robert said, tears welling in his eyes, "you were the only one who helped with the funeral costs. Thomas didn't even send flowers. You sent a check to cover the whole service. I never forgot that." End flashback. "Keep it," I told Robert now, pushing the phone back gently. "Or burn it. I don't need to see it again." "You're a good man, Josh," Robert said. "Better than they deserve." "I'm just a man who learned to lock his doors," I replied. A rhythmic thumping sound began to fill the valley, growing louder by the second. The trees began to sway. "Sounds like your ride is here," Robert grinned, pointing to the sky. A sleek, black helicopter banked over the ridge, the logo of Aurora Developments, my company, gleaming on the side. It began its descent toward the helipad I had built near the lower meadow. "That's Elijah," I said, checking my watch. He wanted to see the finished product. Elijah was the CEO of the firm, a billionaire developer who ate concrete for breakfast. He was the man who had taught me everything I knew about business. We walked down to meet him. The rotor wash whipped our hair as the bird touched down. Elijah jumped out, looking impeccable in a navy suit despite the wind. "Joshua!" Elijah shouted over the noise, shaking my hand with a grip like iron. "This is the place? The famous fortress." "This is it," I said. Elijah looked up at the lodge. He took in the timber beams, the stone chimney, the way the structure seemed to grow out of the mountain itself. "Magnificent," Elijah nodded. "You have an eye, Joshua. You always did." We walked him through the property. Elijah wasn't interested in the drama. He was interested in the execution. He admired the joinery in the study. He nodded approvingly at the security upgrades. "You know," Elijah said as we stood in the living room, looking out at the view, "when you told me you needed time off to handle a legal matter, I was worried. Most men, when they fight their family, they crumble. They lose focus. They let the emotion bleed into their work." He turned to me. "But you delivered the Dubai project 2 weeks ahead of schedule, remotely, while putting your own father in jail." "It was a busy winter," I said dryly. "It shows character," Elijah said. "Ruthlessness tempered by justice. That's what I need." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. The board met yesterday. We're opening a new division. North American Luxury Resorts. We want to build 10 of these lodges across the Rockies and the Sierras. We want you to lead it. I looked at the envelope. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a coronation. Head of the division? I asked. Managing partner, Elijah corrected. Equity stake and full autonomy. You build them, you run them. Your salary doubles. Your stock options triple. I took the envelope. Felt heavy. I'm in, I said. Good. Elijah clapped me on the shoulder. Now, where is this vintage scotch you promised me? As we sat there, drinking 30-year-old scotch with my boss and my mechanic uncle, I realized something. This was the table I had wanted at Christmas. Not a table bound by blood and obligation, but a table bound by respect and shared values. I had traded a family of parasites for a family of choice, and the trade was the best deal I had ever made. Winter came early the next year. By November, the snow was already 3 feet deep around the lodge. The world outside was a white void, silent and freezing, but inside, the fire was roaring. I sat in my study, my sanctuary, surrounded by the smell of old paper and leather. The new books were starting to feel familiar. The chair had molded to my shape. I picked up a letter that had arrived that morning. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was frantic, scrawled, the loops of the letters sharp and jagged. Mom, I hadn't spoken to them in nearly a year. I had blocked their numbers. I had filtered their emails to trash. But a physical letter that still found a way through. I didn't open it immediately. I just held it, feeling the weight of the paper. I knew what it would say. It would be a mix of guilt and begging. We're struggling. Caleb is sick. The apartment has mold. We miss you. How can you be so cruel? It's Christmas. The old Joshua would have ripped it open. He would have read every word. Let the guilt seep into his veins like poison. He would have wondered if he was too harsh. He would have written a check just to make the voices stop. But the man sitting in this chair wasn't that person anymore. I stood up and walked over to the fireplace. The flames danced, hungry and bright. I tossed the letter into the fire. Unopened. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the handwriting. The weapon she had used to manipulate me for decades turn to ash and float up the chimney, disappearing into the cold night air. I felt nothing. No regret. No anger. Just a quiet, steady peace. It wasn't that I didn't care. It was that I finally understood the cost of caring for people who would never care for me. I had paid my dues. I had paid with my childhood, my college fund, my mental health, and nearly my home. The debt was settled. The account was closed. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from David. Just wanted to let you know. Caleb's creditors were arrested today. RICO case out of Denver. He's safe from the sharks for now. Thought you'd want to know. I texted back, thanks, David. Good to know. I put the phone down. I was glad Caleb wasn't going to be killed. I wasn't a monster, but I also knew that without the threat of the sharks, Caleb would likely go right back to his old ways. He would find a new scheme, a new victim, but it wouldn't be me. I looked around the room. I saw the blueprint for the first resort of my new division on the drafting table. I saw the photo of me, Elijah, and Uncle Robert fishing at the lake last summer. I saw the Porsche key sitting on the desk, right next to the smart lock remote. I had reclaimed my life, not by shouting, not by fighting dirty, but by standing firm. I walked to the window and looked out at the valley. The snow was falling harder now, covering the tracks, covering the scars of the land. By morning, everything would be white and clean. A blank canvas. I realized then that the sanctuary wasn't the house. The wood and stone could be replaced. The books could be bought. The sanctuary was the boundaries I had built. It was the self-respect I had forged in the fire of this betrayal. It was the knowledge that I could stand alone, against the people who were supposed to love me, and choose to love myself instead. I took a sip of whiskey. Tasted like victory. Merry Christmas, Joshua. I whispered to my reflection in the glass. And for the first time in my life, I truly meant it. Thank you for walking this difficult path with me. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but I believe it's a necessary one. If you take anything away from my experience, let it be these 3 lessons. Boundaries are not a punishment. They are protection. Saying no to family is not an act of hate. It is an act of self-preservation. You cannot pour from an empty cup, and you certainly cannot keep pouring into a cup that has a hole in the bottom. Trust must be verified. In business, we have audits. In life, we need them too. Don't let the title of mother, father, or brother blind you to the reality of someone's character. Actions always speak louder than DNA. Financial independence is your shield. The reason I survived this, the reason I could hire a lawyer, fix my home, and walk away, was because I had control of my own resources. Never let anyone, not even family, have unchecked access to your financial life. I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with a family member to save yourself? What was the moment you knew enough was enough? If this story resonated with you, or if you agree that peace is worth fighting for, please comment the word good below. It tells me that you value these hard-earned lessons. Stay strong. Protect your sanctuary. And remember, the family you choose is often the one that matters most.